Hello pro strikers, Giorgio Petrosyan is the greatest kickboxer to ever live. A bold statement I know, but I stand by it. Nobody has anywhere near the resume of the Doctor. His record stands at an incredible 106 wins, 42 by way of knockout, with only 3 defeats, and all in the notoriously tough 70 kg division. Some may not remember names like Albert Kraus or Artukashenko, the only man to knock out Alex Pereira in kickboxing, albeit a lot bigger at that moment in time. But you'll certainly recognise Chingiz Alazov, the current featherweight kickboxing world champion. Just scrolling through the names on Petrosyan's resume, it's absolutely ridiculous the men he's beaten. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at what makes Petrosyan so difficult to beat. Stance. Petrosyan is a natural southpaw, with his left being the dominant side. Many notable southpaws are counterfighters, and Giorgio is no different. He applies patient pressure and works well off of an opponent's lead. What's noticeable about Petrosyan's stance from first glance is how narrow he'll position his feet. This serves him well when opting to kick or defend against kicks, as from this stance he can readily lift his lead leg to block or tee. It simplifies his defensive game by using one leg to block all kicks, giving Petrosyan less to think about. So how does Petrosyan, someone who bullies fighters with his counter-punching, generate so much power in his hands from such a narrowed stance? He makes adjustments when he wants to punch. Having both feet firm on the floor with a wide base gives a boxer the ability to generate much more rotational force, which in turn makes their punches more powerful. Giorgio will adjust his stance when he wants to come into box, and he has a few tactics to get him there. Lead hand play. As a southpaw, Giorgio has his right hand as his lead. In the southpaw vs orthodox matchup, the angle of a jab is different than the traditional same side stance matchup. This means Giorgio uses his jab for different purposes other than just to attack and score with a jab. He loves to gain a sense of feel and know where his opponent is. That's his main form of control. By pushing against the forearm of the lead arm of his opponent, he does 2 things. He stops them from being able to use their own jab, and he gives himself a positional advantage with a step to the side. He will step around to the outside of their lead foot, not only to line up his own left hand, but take himself away from the power right hand of the orthodox opponent. Everything Giorgio does is measured. Giving a little push will knock his opponent off balance, reducing the time they have to be able to either attack or defend. Giorgio is a master of positional advantages. His whole game is centred around giving himself a slight edge over his opponent. He rarely engages in a 50-50 exchange. He's a very smart man. When facing up against another southpaw fighter, Giorgio can better use his jab for its intended purpose, to score damage. Here we can see him against Enrico Kell adjusting his tactics to the style matchup, pot-shotting with the jab to disrupt his rhythm. He scores with the jab rather than just using it as a means of establishing physical control, which is what we see him do more of against orthodox Sami Sana in their contest. Against Sana, Petrosyan was able to stifle many of the Frenchman's attacks by simply stiff-arming him with the lead hand and using it as a measuring stick to line up his own punches. Using the left hand to bridge the gap. In a southpaw vs orthodox matchup, the rear side is a fighter's best friend. Petrosyan will often lead with his left hand and use it almost like a jab. He will step to his right, slightly to the outside lead foot of the opponent, essentially taking away his own ability to land the jab, but then slot his left hand through the middle of the guard. When landing the left hand from range, he will stagger his rhythm. Rather than throwing the punch and returning straight back to stance, he will leave it out to obscure the opponent's vision and then shuffle his feet forward to bridge the gap. Petrosyan loves a cross into lead hook, and from this position the lead hook blindsides the opponent's flank. The lead hook, when combined with a pivot, something we'll talk more about later, enables Petrosyan to gain what he loves most, a positional advantage. On-the-fly adjustments. Petrosyan is a textbook fighter. He has near perfect technique in pretty much everything he does, but he's also a gifted fighter. That's what makes him so unique. Not every fighter is capable of making the split-second decisions that Giorgio is capable of, both physically and mentally. He has to have the thought to change his tactic on the fly, but also the physical aptitude to be able to apply it. In these separate sequences, Petrosyan is using the same tactic of the left hand to bridge the gap, but he changes the end game dependent on what the opponent gives him. In the first instance, Kiryu retreats too quickly and Petrosyan isn't able to follow up with any offensive options. But this doesn't mean the initial move was wasted, as he has still achieved something. He's no longer being backed up and he's gained ground in the cage. He puts his opponent on the defensive and threw them off their game. Sometimes we can think of a punch, the end product being an offensive option, but sometimes by throwing a shot and simply putting an opponent on the defensive is a win in itself. In the next instance, the opponent holds his ground. Giorgio is able to land a left hand, but then is tied up in a clinch. Now this was a good decision by the opponent, as he stopped Giorgio from landing anything significant and disrupted his rhythm. However, Giorgio still scored points and won the exchange. In the next clip, the opponent retreats while shelling. Now this is the best outcome from the move. The opponent is in a purely defensive posture and Giorgio can attack freely. Given the opponent is shelled over, two attacks make perfect sense. An uppercut to stand the opponent back up, and a knee to the midsection, as the opponent is now positioned at the perfect angle. Going back to a point from earlier, the left-hand shuffle sets up his lead hook. Now if the opponent is at the right range and ideally being pushed into the ropes or cage wall, Giorgio can really mount an offensive blitz and punch in combination. This also presents an ideal opportunity to score with knees. As Giorgio is a southpaw, his left knee can target the liver, potentially ending the fight there and then. Giorgio rarely punches in combination, and as talked about earlier, he very rarely enters into a 50-50 exchange. He's defensively responsible and only throws in combination when he's at an advantage. The left hand combined with the shuffle step opens many possibilities for Petrosyan, and he very rarely makes a poor decision. And because of this, his moniker, the Doctor, makes perfect sense. Pivots. Much like pro striking, Petrosyan loves a pivot. In boxing, a pivot is a crucial movement that can create advantageous angles for attacks and defence. When a southpaw fighter pivots around their opponent, they are using footwork to move laterally around their opponent whilst maintaining their stance and balance. When a southpaw pivots around their orthodox opponent, they're using their footwork to move laterally around and get to their blind side. By shifting his weight onto his front foot, this foot then acts as a pivot point around which the movement will occur. He can use a left hand to set this up, a lead hand trap with a step, or pivot after landing his lead hook, which are all aimed at disguising the footwork. As he pushes off the back foot, he rotates his hips and upper body to the right. This rotation is crucial as it helps to generate power and maintain balance whilst the back foot slides in a semicircular motion around the opponent. Think of a needle and a compass. He's not moving away from the opponent, but around them. This footwork is smooth and controlled to ensure that the fighter remains balanced and in position to throw punches or defend if necessary. But usually Petrosyan has dealt with the opponent's guard prior, so he can be offensive-minded. As the pivot is completed, he re-establishes his stance, and he's now positioned at an angle that can be advantageous for attack. This footwork is a fundamental aspect of the sweet science of boxing, and this video is basically a glazing of Petrosyan's love for a strategic advantage. Defensive manoeuvres. Like any decent fighter, Petrosyan has a varied defence. He can do all the fundamentals well. I don't think this video will be bringing anything new to light by showcasing his ability to block, slip or pull. But something that might be underappreciated is how Petrosyan's footwork, positioning and physicality are his built-in defence. He loves to push, frame, tie up and pivot. Petrosyan almost fights as if he's blind and relying on other senses. He feels when an opponent is going to throw a strike. This is why he works so well when in close proximity to his opponent. His foot placement allows him more time to react, but he seems to have a way of getting the opponent to throw the strike he wants them to. A little step to the left and he can get them to throw a right body kick. A little step to the right and he can get them to throw a left-sided attack. His position is always limiting opponents' options and giving Giorgio less potential threats to worry about. He simplifies his game. As much as Petrosyan is a thinking fighter, he does things to reduce the amount of options which he has to think about. He's always manoeuvring himself to limit an opponent's offensive options, as well as his own. When you've got less things to think about, you can choose things quicker, speeding up reaction time. Petrosyan has lost all but 3 times. Once against a tie, where the rumours were he'd had his drink spiked beforehand. Yes, that is a legitimate rumour, go Google it. And twice he's been knocked out. The Andy Risty knockout shocked the world. Risty was an unusual fighter with attributes. He was very hard to read and he had big power. He managed to catch Petrosyan backing up in a straight line for a little too long and he iced him. Petrosyan then went on to win around 30 fights consecutively post-knockout loss, whereas Risty faded into obscurity. The other knockout loss, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, was a perfect head kick delivered by elite Thai Superbon. Up until that moment, Petrosyan looked great, and there was really nothing to fault. It was a beautifully timed and well-placed head kick from Superbon, who since went on to win some fights, but also was knocked out himself by Chingiz Alazov, a man Petrosyan had bested a few years back. Alas, this is the 70kg meat grinder of the division. Petrosyan has since gone on to win twice, albeit on his own promotion against lesser skilled opposition, but he looked his usual clinical self doing so, and I have no doubt he can still compete at the top level, even approaching 40 years of age. Petrosyan's success in kickboxing in the 70kg division is unrivaled. I am a massive Chingiz Alazov fan, and I think he has the potential to go down as an all-time great, but he just hasn't got the resume of Giorgio Petrosyan yet. The Doctor is the GOAT, the best ever. Do you think Petrosyan is the best ever? Let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. You can also follow me over on Patreon, the link is in the bio, and Pro Striking appreciates you more than watching Petrosyan mesmerise the audience with his striking perfection.